Hi, welcome to Practical User Experience. I'm Ken Woodworth. I'm VP of Design and Partner at Atten Design Group. We're a strategy, design, and development agency. For over 20 years, I've been developing digital products for the web. Since 2000, Atten has been working with mission-driven organizations all over the world. Like I mentioned, we're a strategy, design, and development agency. We work closely across disciplines to build informed, engaging, and flexible products. We work with higher education institutions, city governments, and nonprofit organizations making an impact on the world. And we like to say we do work that matters. So what are we talking about today? Obviously, user experience. But before we can even begin to talk about UX, we need to understand what it means. So what makes for a great user experience? We're going to talk about how you can gain an understanding of your users, what kind of questions you can ask, and then what's in your toolbox. What methods can you use to learn more about your users? At Atten, we use a number of different activities to inform the work we do. I'll go over a few of my favorites, how to do them, and what's involved. And building a collection of tools you can pull from is going to help you find more meaningful answers to your questions. And by the end of this talk, I hope you feel empowered and inspired to take a user-focused approach and start building your toolbox of UX methods. So let's start by defining user experience. What is a great user experience? It's a combination of three things: organizational goals, user needs, and technical limitations. When all of those things work together, that's when you have a really great user experience. In our work, we start by trying to understand who we're working with. We ask, who are you as an organization? Have you defined your mission, your vision? We use mission statements to understand the purpose of an organization. For example, Ames.edu, Ames Community College, is a client of ours, provide knowledge and skills to advance quality of life, economic vitality, and overall success of the diverse communities we serve. We combine the mission statement with a vision statement to understand the world an organization strives to build. Kiva's is a really great one. We envision a financially inclusive world where all people hold the power to improve their lives. Next, we think about goals and objectives. Organizational goals determine how an organization will fulfill its mission. Things like empowering students to succeed, transforming student pathways from access to completion to support increased enrollment in a diverse population, and so on. And objectives. An objective is a specific, measurable, and time-boxed initiative that directly aligns with a goal. We look at all these aspects of an organization when we're trying to think about what they're trying to achieve. Next, we look at audiences. We build an understanding of each audience group who will be using the products we create. To do that, we need to answer a few key questions. What is their background? Building empathy for a user starts with understanding where they're coming from, not just what they're trying to do. Are they a parent browsing your website while caring for a child? Do they have a vision impairment that could impact the way they see the colors of your website? And what are their goals? Once you understand their background, it's important to understand their goals as well. So sometimes these goals extend beyond your website. Are they trying to plan a vacation to Florida during spring break? Are they looking to understand what exhibits will be available when they visit your museum? And what are their challenges? What are the things they're running up against that you need to help make easier for them? Are they working against a timeline? Are there access issues you need to consider? Do they know what they're looking for? And then finally, do you have access to your audiences? A truly user-focused approach, of course, involves actual users. That's been a real theme for today. In every talk that I've been to, I think people have talked about how personas are bad. You need to actually include real users in your work. And of course, the best work comes from actually including real users. So once you've identified your audiences, you need to start recruiting users from each of those groups, build relationships with these people. You'll want to ask them questions, have them participate in workshops, or get them to test things as you're building them or when they're done. A few real representative users are going to give you much more relevant input than a group of random people or abstract personas. And then finally, the technical limitations. This is the kind of unfun part, but it's important to think about because there will always be technical limitations in everything we create. First of all, what are you making? Is it a website, an app? Is it static or dynamic? Start with the big picture. Then how will you build it? Will you be using a content management system or like Drupal or WordPress? Are there third-party integrations that are vital to its success? Does where you're hosting it impact how it can be built? These are all really important factors to consider. And then how will it be used? Is it informational or transactional? Will your users be using it primarily on a phone, a desktop, a refrigerator, anything and everything in between? So having an understanding of all of these aspects of great UX will ensure that you're creating something that meets your objectives. But in this process, you're going to have questions, so how will you answer them? That's where it's important to have an understanding of your users. So a bit of a tangent here. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York where my parents owned a garden center. There they are. There's my dad with his awesome socks. My parents poured every ounce of their energy into raising my sister and I and growing their plants. I worked there from a young age, through college, and even as an adult on weekends during their busiest times. My parents were people. A customer would come in looking for a plant, and my parents would start helping them by asking questions. What kind of plant? Where will you plant it? How much sun will it get there? How much are you willing to water it? Looking back, the thing that stands out to me is that my parents were trying to build an understanding to give the customer what they were looking for. So what were they doing? They were asking questions. And if we want to gain an understanding of our users, we need to ask the right questions. There's this really great thing called the user research spectrum or landscape. And basically, depending on what we're trying to learn, there's an activity that can give us the answers. And so what does it look like? Well, first, there are 4 types of methods. There's qualitative, answering questions like why and how to fix it. Quantitative methods answer how many and how much. Attitudinal methods are useful in unearthing what people say. And to contrast that, behavioral methods are useful in finding out what people do. Not always the same thing. Nielsen Norman Group has a fantastic article on where different research methods fit in this spectrum. But to give you a quick visualization, so you can imagine this is the spectrum, real simplified. So at the top here we've got behavioral, and at the bottom attitudinal. On the left we've got qualitative to quantitative. And here are 4 different activities plotted on the spectrum. For example, usability testing could be plotted in the qualitative behavioral quadrant. That's in the top left there. Well, surveys might show up in the quantitative attitudinal quadrant, bottom right. Different methods answer different questions. And as you build your toolbox of methods, you'll have more and more ways to get the information you're looking for. So what's in your toolbox? Well, with any project, having a collection of tools to choose from will give you more flexibility. Today I'm going to walk you through 6 of my favorite methods or activities. There are literally infinite methods you can use and infinite permutations on all of these methods. There are so many options for how you can use these things. So don't take everything as a literal, you have to do it this way. Lots of flexibility in everything you're going to see today. The best activities I've found are the ones that have a ripple effect through the rest of the project. You don't want to do something that you create once, it becomes an artifact and you forget about it. You want something that's going to inform future work and live on even beyond the project's life. So the things we're going to look at today, goals and KPIs, brand personality, audiences and personas, personas. That feels like it's a bad word today. I don't know what it is. Task analysis, journey mapping, and card sorting. Let's start with goals and KPIs. So clear project goals make for a successful project. And key performance indicators, or KPIs, tell you if you were successful. So goals provide guidance throughout the project, acting as an anchor when things start to shift, as they often do. You can always go back to asking, why are we doing this? This is especially important when new ideas or opinions are introduced. You ever had that stakeholder who comes in at the last minute and says, well, what about this? I want to change this idea. Let's try something else. You can always bring things back on track by saying, remember, we identified why we're doing this project to begin with. Here are those goals that we're aiming for. And then KPIs tell you if you've achieved your goals. They're clear, measurable metrics that can be tracked over time. You should develop goals and KPIs at the very beginning of any project, of course. You want to set the goals before the work begins, right? That makes sense. And goals and KPIs should be established by team members with an understanding of both the organization and the individual project. You want to make sure you have a broad spectrum of stakeholders involved, so there are no surprise goals added when it's too late to achieve them. And how does it work? Well, when we create goals and KPIs, we start by identifying why a website exists. What is its purpose? Then we look specifically at the project, whether that's a full redesign or a small update. What are we trying to accomplish? And then finally, how do we know if we're successful? KPIs, or key performance indicators, are ways to measure whether you've reached your goals. When we start a project, we outline a number of project goals, like you can see here from our work with Millikan University. We try to keep this list manageable and focused, so we're not trying to do too much and dilute the work. Key performance indicators are where we can start to identify the specific ways we're going to measure success. So we live in a new age, right? We're no longer always in the same office, the same city, the same state, country. Often we're in a virtual meeting, so it's important to understand which of these activities can be done in person or virtually. There's going to be a theme to this, but in this case, both. We typically treat this exercise as a collaborative discussion. We first identify goals as a group, we align on those goals, and then we develop the KPIs for each goal together. We want to make sure that everyone's on board at every step in this process. Because it's meant to be a discussion, this activity can work both in person and virtually, and we like to use collaborative tools and invite our clients to those tools so we can all contribute. So the outcomes, goals, keep the project focused on what's most important, and KPIs tell us if we've achieved our goals. Pretty straightforward. Next, I want to talk about brand personality. I've worked with a number of organizations who said, oh yeah, we have a brand, here's our logo and color palette. A brand is not just a collection of assets. A brand is the way an organization is perceived by those who experience it. The website is a reflection of that brand. Brand personality, as applied to a website, can impact the way a website looks, the way content is written, or the features you may choose to focus on. Depending on the work that's already been done to define the brand, this type of activity can happen before a project begins or very early on in a project. There may already be established brand guidelines. Even when a client has a really well-established brand, we still like to make sure how we understand how it applies to the project. Who should be involved? Internal members can provide input on the desired brand personality, and external users can be vital to this step, sharing the ways they perceive your brand. So we've done this activity in a number of different ways. One approach we've used we like to call this but not that. I'll talk more about card sorting later, but this activity uses some of the same approaches. To start, you define a list of 30 to 40 attributes. These can be stakeholder or user submitted. Next, you sort these qualities into different lists like no, maybe, and definitely, and then you choose final terms from the definitely list, creating a focused list of attributes that all agree on. Now we call this exercise this but not that, because just establishing those attributes might not be enough. We like to take it one step further, but we're not looking for the opposite of each term. We like to understand where those terms go too far. For example, when we worked with Human Rights Watch, they have a lot of photography of injustices happening all over the world. And for that project, we established that the site should be emotive but not sensational. A really important distinction to make in the design of that site. Here's an example of the final list for Milliken, an activity we did remotely using Figma. In an hour meeting, we sorted terms, then spent the rest of the time identifying where those terms might have gone too far. So exceptional but not elite, empowering but not overwhelming, personable but not pandering. You can see that there's a subtlety to the differences here, but it's really important to define that, and that gives those words a lot more meaning. I mentioned this earlier, but this activity can take shape in a number of ways. We've also used FigJam for dot voting, inviting all team members to participate. One of our first in-person workshops after the pandemic ended, it's not over, but whatever, anyway. When things had died down a little bit with COVID, was with the Natural History Museum of Utah. In that case, we split into groups, had each group do a card sort and vote on terms, and then we brought the groups back together and shared what each of them ended up with. And it was a really great way to discuss the different opinions and different perspectives that everyone brought. For Tampa Airport, we held in-person workshops with both employees and travelers. We had each group vote on personality traits that represented the Tampa Airport, and then we were able to present those findings to show where the groups agreed and where they differed. You can see that the different colored dots are the different groups. So getting user input can be really helpful. For some projects, we flip this activity into a from this to that, where we measure desired versus perceived personality. And we can identify, we can then identify areas where we may need to focus to change that perception. So this is another activity that can be done both in person and virtually. There are also parts that can be done asynchronously using tools like Optimal Sort, which is just an online card sorting tool. And one of the greatest outcomes of this activity is alignment. When everyone on the team understands the desired brand personality, this helps eliminate subjective feedback and makes future discussions much easier. All right, next I'm going to speak about identifying audiences and creating personas. We work with a lot of clients who haven't done thorough research into their audiences, or maybe haven't done that research recently. But we use audiences to understand the types of users that use a website. We use personas to represent fictional characters for each of those groups. Personas are especially helpful when you don't have access to your users. But ultimately, these tools are meant to build empathy for the people actually using the website. So an organization may have audience groups already established. Do those same groups apply to the website? Are their needs different because of the context? We establish audience groups at the very beginning of each project. Personas are a natural next step, adding details to help give context to specific user needs. So this is an area where it's really important to have representation from across an organization. You may think you have a good understanding of your audience groups, but find that someone from another department has a completely different list of audiences and relationships with those groups. Bringing everyone into this step helps keep everyone on the same page. For example, someone from the alumni office might have a very different perspective on student needs than someone from admissions. So how do audiences work? Well, first we define key audience groups, and then for each group we write a 1 to 2 sentence description. Then we document how they learn about the website, and this goes back to what I was talking about earlier about understanding their background. And then finally, what are the key tasks this group needs to complete on the website? Next, we create unique personas for each audience group, and using information from user research, like user surveys, stakeholder surveys, focus groups, or interviews, we'll add things like passions, goals, tasks, challenges, and demographic information. All of these details are meant to make this persona feel real and help build empathy for this group. For the Natural History Museum of Utah, we identified 7 major audience groups, some with a number of subgroups. For Millikan University, we developed different audience groups and then personas for each of those groups. We also identified the top tasks or goals for each group. More on this later. Here you can see a rough persona template for an example persona. You can see we're doing everything we can to make this persona feel real. We're even taking quotes from user research to help build this persona's background. You'll see these pop up later, but we also developed persona components in Figma that we use throughout the strategy process. These are personas we developed for Ames Community College. Each of these cards represents a persona for each audience group. However you develop your audience groups and personas, it's vital that you're able to make changes and share them. We typically create audiences and personas in Google Docs and then integrate them into other artifacts in Figma. So even if you have access to your users, clearly defined audiences and detailed personas can help everyone at your institution think like your users. The best outcome I've seen is months after we've created personas, having a client say to someone else on the team, well, that's not what Susan would do. Susan, a fictional character from a persona. And then continue to frame the rest of the discussion around that persona. Following closely on the heels of audiences and personas, we typically move on to what we call task analysis. This is an activity that helps identify and prioritize the top 10 to 15 user-centered tasks. This step involves all of the work we've done establishing goals and defining audience groups and personas. So it should happen following them. And this activity is great because it can involve both internal teams and users. You can poll users and ask what are the top things you're trying to do when using the website. You can also get a lot of interesting ideas from involving people from across an institution. Again, everyone has a different perspective, so it's important that you understand that. So how does it work? First, we identify critical tasks. What are the tasks that happen on the website that are vital to the success of the organization? For example, applying for a degree program, buying a ticket, making a donation. Next, we identify common tasks, tasks that most users will do. Then, we combine these lists. We group similar tasks and we remove duplicates. Finally, we prioritize those tasks, elevating the tasks that have the most impact across audience groups. Now, just because something doesn't make it into the top task list, it doesn't mean it's not a task the website will support. We're trying to prioritize the tasks that will have the greatest impact on the organization or meet the most important user needs. So here's a bird's eye view of some of the tasks we created for Millikan. So applying, exploring majors and programs, finding admission info, finding cost and aid details, viewing the campus, etc. So again, collaboration is key. Do we want to do this virtually or in person? Doesn't matter. It can happen anywhere as long as everyone can contribute. So what are the outcomes? Well, this is another one of those alignment exercises. Developing an understanding of the tasks that are important to the organization as well as the user. Prioritizing the tasks helps everyone make objective decisions later in the project and can help identify areas that need more attention. Next up, journey mapping. I love journey mapping as a way of understanding the process a user goes through in order to complete their goals. Journey mapping can be used to make decisions or identify problems that need to be fixed. Because of this, it can happen anytime after the start of a project. And I've seen some of the best results coming from internal teams gaining a better understanding of their users through journey mapping. This can also be done with real users, of course, to gain even more insight. So how does it work? First, choose a persona, then create a scenario based on that persona's goals. Identify tasks that persona needs to complete, walk through the scenario, noting each step, and then identify opportunities and map that persona's mood throughout the exercise. So here you can see a few of the journey maps from our work with Ames Community College. We have the persona along the left, like I mentioned earlier, then detailed steps the persona took in this scenario across the top there, grouped into major themes like cost exploration, program exploration, application exploration. Throughout the conversation around this journey, we noted opportunities as they arose. That's at the bottom here. These are all things that we want to keep in mind as we're moving through the rest of the process. What are the major opportunities that we can consider that will make this process better? And then finally, we plotted how this persona felt at each point in the process, visualizing areas that need more work. For the Tampa airport, we held in-person workshops with both staff and visitors, and this helped really build an understanding of each process from a different perspective and introduce new ideas we wouldn't have found otherwise. As a bonus, we often go right from journey mapping into sketching. Using the opportunities from the journey map, this is a great time to start thinking about making things better. What if this process worked more like this? We've done this with clients, without clients, and shared ideas later. It's a really great way to kind of take that exercise where you learned a lot and really turn it into something actionable. So we've run this activity virtually, working in Figma or FigJam to guide the exercise. In person can give you very different results, letting each participant create their own journey map and share their results. Or like the Tampa airport example, you can run this with groups that can all bring their own perspectives to the journey. This is another huge empathy builder. Often people take for granted what it's like to use their website. One of the best examples I have of journey mapping is a project where we ran 17 different journey mapping exercises with 17 different groups who each had their own website. And in almost every case, every team got to a point using their own website where they could not complete their task and had to call someone as a step in the process. And so that was a really clear focus for the future work for that project. We needed to make sure that we fixed that part in the process so that that wasn't happening all the time. All right, the final activity I'm going to cover is card sorting. So what is it? To put it simply, card sorting is a UX method in which users organize topics into groups. Card sorting or affinity mapping can be helpful in generating ideas and organizing them. We often use card sorting to inform information architecture. When we use card sorting in this case, we're looking to learn how a user thinks about organizing content before we build a sitemap for a website. And again, the best information is going to come from real users, representing each audience group as much as possible. If you don't have access to real users, this is where the personas can come in. Put on your Susan or Jim hat and start sorting. So how does it work? Well, first we defined the terms. When thinking about a sitemap, these are the pages within your site. We like to keep this list manageable. Anything over 60 to 80 terms, and it's asking a lot for users to complete. Next, we gather participants. Again, real users where possible. And then we run the workshop. We have each user sort the terms into groups and then label the groups. Finally, we analyze the results. How are users grouping things? Does it align with your assumptions? What kind of labels did they use? When running a card sort, there are two approaches you can use, open and closed. An open card sort lets users sort cards and group things on their own and then label those groups. A closed card sort, you have predefined labels. You get very different results from each of those activities. So if you're already set on your labels and you just want to figure out where content goes, that's where you would do a closed card sort. If you're still trying to figure out how to organize your site in general, An open card sort is going to be better for that. So this is a photo from an open in-person card sort we did with the city of Raleigh. Whenever you're running a workshop, I highly recommend bringing candy. It always helps. And here are some screenshots from an open virtual card sort done using optimal sort. So virtual card sorts provide a lot of data. Again, that's that quantitative method, and can include any number of users. In-person card sorts provide a very different perspective, letting you see how a participant approaches grouping things. We also encourage participants to share their thoughts as they're sorting to give even more insight, and we sit there and we watch them go through this activity. And in this case, you might only have 2 people doing it, but you can gain a ton of insight from learning how they're thinking about your content. So what are the outcomes? Well, a card sort can give you a lot of ideas for categorizing content. You can also gain ideas for labels, but one word of caution here, the labels from a card sort aren't necessarily what you'll use in the final site map, but they can help influence your decision. And finally, I wanted to talk about some of the tools we use for these activities. When it comes to collaboration and generating ideas, we love to use Figma or FigJam. Mural and Miro are also good. Any of these tools can be used for these kinds of activities. For testing, we use Optimal Workshop and Maze. Great tools for getting a lot of data from your users. But most importantly, use what works for you. All of these tools can give you different results depending on how you use them. Find the tools you like and give you the best results. So what's next? I'm sure that person is looking at someone's website and wondering how they're going to use it on a VR headset, whatever. User experience is ever-changing. No matter how much work you put into understanding your organization and your users, you can't stop there. A big part of great user experience is testing. Testing goes beyond usability testing. You need to check all of the boxes. You need to have a holistic approach to testing. Usability, accessibility, performance, and building things that are device agnostic. You need to make sure you're meeting your users where they're coming from. So take all of that work you've done and don't stop there. Continue to evaluate, continue to improve, and continue to keep the user involved. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Yes, could you spend the next 4.5 hours going into extreme detail on how you develop goals and KPIs for your most radical, least market-oriented, absolutely most impractical clients you've ever dealt with?
No.
Anything on that as far as goals and KPIs for people where it's not like, well, it's how many students register, it's how many widgets are sold, like when it gets into the...
So there have been times where KPIs don't make sense, right? So we have done work before where just defining, what is the purpose of this project? And maybe it's just the website needs a refresh, right? That can be enough. And if that's the case, maybe the focus is more on the design side than on new features or new user journeys, things like that. And that can totally change the process you go through. But that's why we do that step as early on as possible, because if you think your goal is one thing and then it turns out later that it's totally different, obviously that is going to change the entire project. So, but yeah, I don't have a great example right now of something like that. Anybody else? Yeah.
So I also have a question about goals and KPIs.
Okay, sure.
So often when I get to that activity, there's sometimes people get stuck on what's a goal or what's a goal for this project.
Sure.
So I think there are sort of product metrics like, we want to increase conversions.
Sure.
There are project goals like, we need to launch something on time to satisfy something or somebody.
Right.
And then, and there are larger business goals, like we want to expand the market that we're reaching, or reach a new market. The website's part of that, but the website's not going to make that happen by itself.
Right.
So I'm curious, when you do this exercise, do you narrow it down to one of those things? Do you mash them all together? How do you sort of frame the discussion so that it's productive for the project?
Great question. I mean, it is challenging, and often, depending on the number of stakeholders you have, that can greatly impact the number of goals that the project might have. Often we're working in a situation where we've gotten an RFP, where they've already spent some time thinking about why they're even doing this project. If they have organizational level goals that the website is going to contribute to, we want to understand that, because if we don't, then we're designing in a silo, and it's not going to help achieve those goals in the same way. So there always are going to be kind of goals that are a little broader than you might want, or aren't quite going to fit neatly into the project. And that's okay. I mean, I think one thing that a lot of people get kind of hung up on with all of this is, how do we make this as perfect as possible? And sometimes it doesn't matter. It's often enough just to talk about those things, document them, and have them as a record that you can keep going back to and talking about, does this goal still make sense now that we're this far into the project? And if it means, sometimes we'll tell a client, that sounds really important. I don't think this project is going to be the thing that will solve that for you, so I don't think it quite fits onto that goal list, but it's something we can keep in mind. We'll still document it somewhere, but it might not make it onto the list too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that resonates.